Hey navigators, on this episode of Navigating Narcissism, I'm answering all of your burning questions about how, when, and what it means to go no contact with a narcissist. This is a common dilemma, but it's not as simple as you think. This podcast should not be used as a substitute for medical or mental health advice. Individuals are advised to seek independent medical advice, counseling, and/or therapy from a healthcare professional with respect to any medical condition, mental health issue, or health inquiry, including matters discussed on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the podcast author or individuals participating in the podcast and do not represent the opinions of Red Table Talk Productions, iHeartMedia, or their employees. So in our first question, Carmen asks, when you talk about going no contact, is it literally zero contact? My dad is a narcissist. If I do this, does that mean he won't see my kids either? So, Carmen, let's start at the top with what no contact is. I mean, it's what it sounds like. You have no contact with this person, right? You really have no ongoing communication. You're not texting, you're not calling, you're not going places where they are. You don't see them anymore. Here's what's interesting about no contact. There was some research I had seen a couple of years ago. And in this, it was about 500 people who had gone through narcissistic abuse. And no contact actually popped up as the strategy that was associated with sort of healing and feeling better the fastest. It kind of makes sense, right? If you don't have to deal with the person who is causing you so much harm, you are going to be less stressed out. The problem is that's often not possible. So no contact in its purest form is just that. It's no contact. But that is differentiated from something we call low contact. And low contact kind of has three things that come under it. The first is something called gray rock or gray rocking. Gray rock is basically what it sounds like. It's sort of being as uninteresting as a gray rock. So your answers tend to be kind of one or two words. You're sort of blah. You're not really engaged. You're not offering up your own topics of conversation. You're just, yeah, okay, sure. Got it. But you don't ask about them. When they ask you how you're doing, you might say, good. A level up from gray rock is something called yellow rocking, a term that was actually developed by Tina Swithin, who was a guest on this podcast. And Tina developed this idea of yellow rocking. And the yellow, I think, is only because she actually likes the color yellow. She's like, it was brighter than gray to her. So there's no magic mystery around the yellowness of it. But because Tina's work is so much in co-parenting, she said it's probably not healthy for a child to see a parent being so yes, no, and flat. It could actually be unsettling for a child. Yellow rock is still relatively minimal engagement, but a little bit of bringing your own flair into it. Like, hey, yeah, great. Hope you have a good time. And you're actually sort of, there's a little bit more emotion and, did you have a good weekend? Like you can actually ask those kinds of questions and it doesn't seem as confrontational. Another term that's been developed, actually with somebody I have worked with on this before, and she works in tech, and she said, well, you should call it firewalling. And I actually thought that was also a great communication strategy. Firewalling is when you think about what a firewall is on your computer or on your device, it's meant to protect the information going out and the information coming in. And what she was thinking and what sort of punched it out to mean is that when you're firewalling with a narcissistic person, you're not going to want to give them sensitive information, right? The same way you wouldn't put like your social security number into some website that could take your information. You make sure it's a secure site. It's a similar thing that you're not going to share your vulnerabilities or something about you that could be used against you. But a firewall also protects what comes in. With a narcissistic relationship, we can be very careful about what we put out and set good boundaries so we don't let a lot of that toxic stuff in. So that combination of stuff is the whole sort of spectrum of no and low contact. But in Carmen's question, she's saying specifically, Dad's a narcissist. Sounds like she really wants to cut down her contact with him. But does that mean he won't see my kids either? And this is where, and throughout this episode, I want to highlight this issue that we cannot take such a black and white approach to no contact. It may very well be, if Carmen feels, for example, that a relationship with their grandfather may not necessarily be a bad thing for these kids, or she doesn't want to stop them from having it. She may figure out ways of dropping them off, having a very sort of a quick goodbye, making sure it's on days when maybe they all have an organized activity to do. So Carmen can definitely minimize her contact to almost nothing, very little in between contact, and then perhaps still the kids could have that relationship. Be very, very careful, any of you who may have children and then there's grandparents and extended family, about ever saying, nope, my kid's going to have nothing to do with you, and to do that from an angry place. I fully understand the anger, but my eye is on your kids. What you don't want is for those children down the line to say, how come I never got to have an experience with grandparents or aunts and uncles or whomever it may be? Because those potentially could sometimes be decent relationships. That will be its own other episode because it's complicated, but really tread lightly there and think through your situation. In some cases, you might say, no, this is a dangerous person for my kids, then absolutely honor that. But in this case, if Carmen feels that she does want her dad to have contact with her children, but she herself needs to really set down a very, very, very hard boundary with her dad. There are workarounds. Will it be 100% no contact? No, because there has to be coordination. But that Carmen doesn't have to have deep or conflictual conversations with her father. In our second question, Angelica asks, how do you actually go no contact? Do I tell my brother I'm no longer speaking to him, or do I just stop answering his texts without explanation? Angelica, you're asking the question for the ages here, which is not just about no contact, but the how of no contact. Any of you who know my work, you know I've always said, never call a narcissistic person out, and never in very black and white terms tell them, this is what I'm about to do. Because what they tend to do is, in a way, you don't want to give them your playbook. And they're going to almost view that as game on. As, oh, you think you're going to go no contact with me? Well, I'll show you. Now, some people would say, if Angelica doesn't tell her brother she's going to go no contact, doesn't that mean she's just ghosting him? Not entirely. First of all, ghosting is kind of having its minute in the sun. For a while, we're like, ghosting is bad. That's a very antagonistic behavior. But for some people, if a relationship is toxic enough, it may actually be a little bit safer to kind of fade away, because that sort of goodbye conversation won't serve much of a function. It's probably going to end up in more harm for the person who wants to go no contact. So it's going to be a case-by-case situation. I often tell people one of the best ways to go no contact is a bit of a fade. You're no longer initiating any communication with them. You're not reaching out to them. You're not responding to nonsense text, how you doing, how's your day? You may still respond to factual text, like, do you have this, especially if it's you have something that they actually need or someone else needs, you may respond to those. But there's going to be very, very little further engagement. And if none of those sort of necessary texts are happening, then again, there's a sort of a slow fade. Here's where it gets tricky, is that initially the person you're going no contact with is going to escalate. Hello, I've been trying to reach you. Where are you? Question mark, question mark, question mark, emoji, voice memo, voice note, more emojis. They're going to keep coming at you because they're used to you responding to them. It's actually not that bizarre that they would want to know. If you were to round up, if Angelica was to go up to her brother and say, you know what, I've decided it's healthier for me to not be in contact with you, I would be willing to bet you $1,000 that Angelica's brother is going to come back at her with some gaslighted, cruel, manipulative response. So in most of these cases, a gradual fading out without a sort of I am never talking to you again kind of a thing is the better way to go. It'll be pretty clear. I mean, especially if there's a last conversation that you had with someone was very conflictual, very problematic, you've heard the apologies 100 times before, and you just fade away. This is a lot easier if you do not live near this person. So if they live far away, you're not in regular contact with them. If you are in regular contact, the gradual fade is almost essential because it's a little bit strange to have daily communication with someone and then just disappear. Since this is a family, Angelica can easily anticipate that her brother may very well try to use other family members to get to her. How come you're not responding to your brother's text? Your brother keeps asking me why you won't respond to him. That's the triangulation. Angelica could respond to that person and say, it's all good. How are you doing? This is actually doesn't relate to you, so don't worry about it. But you can see it gets messy. However, making the big, strong, I am going no contact with you, I never recommend that. In our next question, Theo says, I've seen the term gray rocking a lot on social. I've tried it, but it seems to be making things worse in my situation. Is that normal? Oh, Theo, you just said a mouthful. I'm so glad we got this question, because this is exactly what happens, not only with no contact, but also with gray rock. You have to remember, for the narcissistic person, you are a source of supply. They're not listening to you. You are a source of response. You're a source of validation. You're a source of something to do. But they are not really listening to you unless it works for them. So if you disengage, if you won't spar with them, because remember, the narcissistic person's pretty much singular motivation in a relationship is power, control, domination, right? They want to run the show. So if you're not communicating the way they want, they're losing some of that power and control, and they do not like it. So gray rock really puts a narcissistic person on their back heel. They do not like it. Initially, a lot of people have told me, just like Theo asks, I went gray rock and things have gotten worse. They're baiting me. They're saying terrible things to me. It's like they're trying to get a rise out of me. Because remember, gray rock is very, very unemotional. That's why I'm not as big a fan of it. There was a time when I was like gray rock, but then I thought, I was seeing more and more and more. People were getting a lot of blowback. This is why yellow rock, I think, is a better strategy if you're going to have a low contact sort of an approach. Then it doesn't feel like you've gone so flat. And I think people who go gray rock are also more vulnerable to sort of the kind of like the mockery. Oh, so what did your therapist tell you not to talk to me? What is this? What is this whole thing? And they'll really sort of try to minimize what you're trying to do, which in essence is trying to protect yourself. So when you go gray rock, when you go no contact, you can almost guarantee there's going to be an escalation. And that escalation can be really, really painful. They may keep pushing up the volume on the baiting where they're really going at things that matter to you, that hurt you. They may be things about you. They may be things about your kids. They may be things about things in your life, beliefs that you hold that are really important to you. And then what you may find is that you almost snap. You're like, how could you say that? And now they've broken you out of your gray rock. And they're satisfied. They're like, okay, I'm cool. You're not. You're losing your mind. Guess you're the one who's unhinged and I've got it together. And then you're even angrier at yourself. One thing I want to tell everyone about gray rock, be kind to yourself. If you decide to go that way and they bait you and you kind of blow up at them, don't say, oh my gosh, I can't manage this. I'm so bad at this. You're great at this. It's not easy to sort of hold your ground on either gray rock or no contact. Try some yellow rocking. Try a gradual sort of coming out. Don't be so much of the flat. They're still going to push back because they want their usual banter with you. But be prepared that if you do go gray rock or no contact, there is going to be an escalation. Things are going to seem worse. Now, what will happen is if you can white knuckle it, you'll come around the bend. And what will happen is you'll actually kind of be no longer interesting to them. They're baiting you. You're not taking the bait. They're talking to you. You're not responding. They need more supply. And after a week or two or even a month maybe, if you're no longer supply, they're going to move on to new supply. So, but that's a long time to endure the kind of, again, the antagonism and the manipulation. But Theo's experience is universal. So if any of you are struggling with an experience of when you go gray rocking or no contact, I'm here to tell you it's totally normal. One thing to also be clear on when it comes to narcissistic supply is narcissistic supply isn't just praise and applause and validation and Instagram likes. Narcissistic supply can be also what we usually consider negative or bad stuff, but actually getting into an argument with them. Narcissistic people are fighters. They like the fight. the lack of empathy in some ways makes it so they're willing to go on the attack. Now, don't get me wrong, they're thin-skinned and probably more sensitive than any of us are. And so when they're hurt, they lash out more. So if you get a zinger in there, they're going to come at you. And in a way, that idea that they could win the fight is a source of supply for them. So be aware that in this case, your supply may not just be that you're praising them. That ship may have sailed long ago, but you may be this source of conflict that almost becomes like a little psychological boxing sparring workout. And you don't want it, but they do, because that sparring really helps them feel powerful. In this next question, James asks, very simply, how do I know it's time to go no contact? I wish there was a little ping you heard in your head and you're like, this is it. Ask anyone who's ever gone no contact and they'll say, I just knew. They would say, it's gotten to the point where this relationship is harming me. I ruminate about it. I feel sick before seeing them. I feel sick after seeing them. I feel sick while I'm with them. You really, really will feel that. I'm going to tell you personally, some of my no contact experiences where a person said something so hurtful that violated my values, that were personal attacks. There were bells you could not unring, that something in me just sort of died. And I thought, no, this is simply just not good for me. And so I know for me personally, and I think for many people, no contact is spurred on by someone saying something that was very cruel or unforgivable. No contact, you often will know, is, again, it's more than anything, it's harm. Now, there's some cases that are obvious harm, like if there was physical violence or physical threats, that feels much more in your face and very clear, like this is not even a safe place for me anymore, or this person has put me in dangerous situations. That will be more obvious. But in many narcissistic relationships, stuff is subtle. And the subtlety is what throws people off. And many people will think, oh, I feel uncomfortable. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Sadly, this is why it can take a while for people to fully give in to say, this is just not good for me. And this podcast and anything we talk about related to narcissism is a place for me to tell you, this is not good for you. This will never be good for you. But we were never given permission to be able to say a toxic relationship is actually harming our health. And